Welcome back to the deep dive. This is where we take the sources you've shared with us, the articles, the research, and yeah, the frustration, and we just strip away all the noise to get to what you really need to know.
Hmm.
Today, we're on a mission that is critical for pretty much every single language learner out there. We are diving deep into that massive, just debilitating disconnect between the English you learn in a classroom and the English you hear in real life.
It is the universal linguistic pain point.
It really is.
You spend months, maybe even years, mastering the rules, building vocabulary, getting good grades on
You
tests.
feel confident.
You feel very confident in your command of the language.
Mm.
And then you step out into the real world, you hear authentic conversational English,
Mm-hmm.
and that confidence just evaporates.
It's gone.
It's gone. It's fast. The words all run together, and we hear this constantly from people. I know all the words, but when native speakers talk, it just sounds like one long, confusing stream of sound. It sounds like gibberish.
And that feeling is, look, it's 100% valid. We are here to validate it. Absolutely.
Because it is not a personal failing. It's not your study habits.
Mm-hmm.
It's a fundamental kind of mechanical disconnect between how we learn in a controlled way and the chaos of real language.
Right. It's like you're learning language X in the textbook, but then a movie exposes you to language Y.
And that difference is just, it's profound.
It's a shocking transition for anyone who's learned a language, mostly through, formal study.
Hmm.
The control you have in a classroom, the speed, the enunciation, it creates this artificial reality.
I have a personal story from the source material that just perfectly sums this up.
Yeah.
I was studying French for 2 years, really dedicated.
Mm-hmm.
And in the classroom, my instructor was amazing. She spoke so slowly, so clearly. She'd enunciate every syllable. Bonjour, comment allez-vous?
Textbook perfect.
Exactly, textbook perfect. My confidence was through the roof. I was thinking, I've got this. I am fluent. I understand French.
You had mastered the rhythm of formal written French being spoken out loud.
Precisely. And then
Mm-hmm.
I went to France.
Yeah, the real test. The real test. I remember asking for directions to a landmark in Paris. And the response I got, I'll try to mimic the speed. It was something like, Pour aller au Louvre, vous prenez la deuxième à gauche, puis tout droit. Just this
Right.
wall of sound.
Right.
It just hit me like a ton of bricks. I understood maybe 20% of what they said. It sounded like they were speaking at superhuman speed. And what I had learned is maybe 10 separate words just blended into this one impossible nonstop flow.
And that's devastating because your brain is busy searching for those separate, isolated words you memorized.
Yeah.
But those units, they just don't exist in natural speech. And I had a remarkably similar, intensely frustrating experience myself, but with Spanish cinema.
Oh, interesting.
I could read complex Spanish literature pretty well. I knew the vocabulary, the verb conjugations. I felt like, I had done the hard work.
The listening.
Yeah.
The auditory input was the bottleneck.
Oh, it was brutal, especially films or, unscripted conversations. I was watching this one Spanish film, and I had to keep rewinding it, sometimes every 10 seconds, because I just couldn't process the meaning fast enough.
Mm.
And what was so infuriating was that I was using Spanish subtitles. I thought, okay, this will save me. The written words will match the spoken words.
And what did you find?
Not even close. Not only were they speaking incredibly fast and using all this regional slang that, wasn't in any dictionary I owned,
Right.
but when I really looked, when I compared what I heard to the written subtitles, I saw this crucial difference. The subtitles were often simplified. They were cleaned up, sometimes even slightly different from the actual, rapid-fire dialogue the actors were using.
Wow.
The subtitles were giving me the idea of what was said, but not the raw phonetic reality of it.
So even the visual safety net was an edited, easier version of the real thing. That is the big foundational takeaway for you, the listener. Classroom language is the blueprint. Real language is the sound of that blueprint being built by a high-speed robot assembly line. They are two completely different things.
And that's exactly why we've structured this deep dive the way we have.
Yeah.
We're going to unpack 5 distinct reasons, 5 fundamental linguistic barriers that explain why your brain hears native speech as this wall of sound.
The diagnosis.
The diagnosis. And once we've done that, we'll move on to 4 actionable, concrete strategies you can start using immediately to really train your ear and bridge that gap.
Okay, let's unpack this. We need to get into the mechanics. We need to understand why the sounds you hear are so different from the words you studied. Let's start with the most fundamental, the most mechanical hurdle, the one that makes speech sound like this continuous blur and is responsible for that feeling of words just flowing into one long stream. Let's talk about connected speech.
Connected speech is, without a doubt, the #1 barrier. It fundamentally violates this assumption that language learners have,
Which is
which is that one word ends, there's a tiny, clean pause, and then the next word begins. Native speakers simply don't do that. We connect words seamlessly. We treat a whole phrase as one continuous phonetic unit, and we're often blending the final sound of one word right into the initial sound of the next.
So if a learner is trained to listen for, say, 7 separate words, but what they actually hear is maybe 3 blended sound units.
They fall right into that recognition gap instantly.
It's like they're listening for the wrong thing entirely.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And when we speak naturally, we're using 2 specific linguistic tricks to do this: assimilation and elision.
Okay, break those down.
So assimilation is when a sound changes to become more like a sound next to it. For example, the phrase 10 bucks. Very few people say 10 bucks with a hard N. It usually sounds more like team bucks.
Right, 10 bucks. I hear that.
That's because the N sound, which you make with your tongue, changes to an M sound, which you make with your lips, to get ready for the B sound in bucks, which is also made with your lips. It's an efficiency move for the mouth.
And what about elision?
Elision is even simpler. Sounds just disappear. They get deleted entirely. Think about a phrase like must go. In a hurry, a speaker might just say must go.
The tease is gone.
The T just vanishes because it's awkward to say a hard T right before a hard G. So the learner is listening for this, 7-sound phrase, but they only receive a 5-sound phrase. They think they missed 2 whole words.
When really, 2 sounds were just deleted for speed.
Exactly.
Okay, let's deconstruct that classic example from the source material. What are you doing? In formal speech, that's 4 distinct words. The learner is listening for 4 separate vocal events.
But in authentic, fast conversation, what we actually say is, what are you doing?
What are you doing?
And in that one phrase, you can see 3 things happening at once.
Yeah.
First, you have elision, the H in what, and the first A and R are basically gone. Second, you have a kind of reduction and assimilation where are you just becomes ya.
And the third one, this is so specific to American English, is that T in what, it turns into the soft, fast, stilled sound.
That's right. Linguists call it the flap T. It happens when a T is stuck between 2 vowel sounds.
And that flap T is a perfect example of how connected speech creates so much confusion.
Oh, enormous confusion. If you've been trained to hear T as this hard, sharp consonant like the T in top, you will never, ever recognize that quick, soft D sound in Wadaya. Your brain hears a sound that just doesn't match the word it knows, and the connection fails.
And that one single example, what are you doing? It just perfectly illustrates the whole problem. This isn't some rare exception, right? This is happening constantly.
Constantly. Native speakers rely on these common contractions and blends all the time. The 3 most common are, I'd say, non-negotiable for anyone trying to improve their listening.
Which are?
Want to becomes wanna, going to becomes gonna, and guy becomes gotta.
And the list goes on, like, oh, did you becoming did ya?
Or could've becoming coulda.
So if someone asks you, did you see the film? And your brain is listening for, did you see? That very first word is already wrong. The did and yi sounds have blended together. Your brain is playing catch-up from the very start of the sentence.
And these blended forms are overwhelmingly used in casual, unscripted speech, which is exactly the kind of English you want to be listening to if you want to get better.
Right.
But they're almost always left out or, minimized in textbooks that are focused on formal, written English. And that difference guarantees that the learner is always one step behind the phonetic reality of language.
Okay, so if connected speech is about blending words together, our second major barrier, which you call reductions and weak forms, is about making the individual words themselves shorter.
Exactly. Or in some cases, practically deleting them. And this is a really critical distinction because it affects different kinds of words.
Right.
Reductions usually happen to content words, important nouns and verbs, by dropping a whole syllable. Weak forms, on the other hand, happen to the tiny, unstressed function words, the little grammar words, where the vowel sound just gets dramatically reduced or it disappears completely.
So let's start with the first one, syllable reduction, making the big words shorter.
Right. The source gives some great examples of this. Take the word probably. In careful, slow speech, you might hear 3 clear syllables. Probably. But ask any native speaker in a quick conversation, and it's almost always probably. We just drop that middle vowel sound entirely. 3 syllables become 2.
And that's a huge loss of information for the learner. It happens with so many complex words.
Oh, absolutely. Think of comfortable. You're trained to hear 4 clear syllables. Comfortable. But when we say it quickly, that middle part just collapses. It becomes comfortable.
Or interesting.
Interesting is a great one. We almost always drop that first unstressed E sound. We say interesting, not the full 4-syllable interesting.
The frustration here must be just immense. You're listening for a 5-syllable word, but you hear a 3-syllable word, and that 2-syllable difference causes this processing delay.
Right. Your brain scrambles. It tries to match the short sound to a word it knows, and by the time it figures it out, the speaker's already on to the next point.
And that leads us to the other part of this, weak forms.
Weak forms are all about the function words. These are the small common words like to, for, and can, are, of. When these words aren't stressed in a sentence, which is most of the time, their clear vowel sound just collapses into what we call the schwa.
The schwa sound.
It's the most common sound in English. It's that tiny neutral sound. It's the sound of a vowel that's barely there.
So it's like these little words are just getting swallowed by the rest of the sentence.
Precisely. If I'm speaking carefully and I stress the word, I'll say, I can go, with a full vowel sound in can. But if the stress is somewhere else in the sentence, that word becomes, I can go.
I can go.
The full vowel just vanishes, and it's replaced by that quick, clipped schwa sound.
So the learner, who has been trained their whole life to listen for the full, clear can sound, thinks they just missed the word entirely.
Yes. Or they think they heard some other shorter word they don't know. And the emotional impact of that is that you feel like you're missing every third or fourth word. You hear a sentence like, I need to go to the store.
Right.
You're listening for a clear oo sound in to, but what you're actually hearing is this almost inaudible T sound. The word for often becomes for. The word and becomes a quick N.
So the words are grammatically essential. They are physically there, but phonetically, they are so reduced, they're almost invisible. The loss of clarity from the schwa in weak forms combined with the blending and deletion from connected speech. That really is the double helix of auditory confusion for a learner. So now we take those two things, the blending and the shortening, and we deliver them at high speed. And that brings us to our third challenge, the actual pace of native conversation and the cognitive wall it creates.
Yet the speed itself is a huge challenge. Native speakers, we typically talk at somewhere between 140 and 160 words per minute in a casual conversation.
Which feels normal to us.
Feels totally normal to us. But for the learner, it feels impossibly fast. And the real reason for that isn't just how fast the speaker's moving their mouth. The fundamental problem is the processing bottleneck in the listener's brain.
Okay, let's dive deeper into that. When I'm listening in English, my native language, what's my brain doing that makes it feel so instantaneous?
In your native language, that whole process of recognizing language is automated. It's unconscious. It's instant. When you hear the sound wanna, your brain doesn't have to decode it. It doesn't break it down into sounds, check a dictionary, and then figure out the grammar.
Right.
It immediately, and I mean immediately, recognizes the entire concept as want to. The neural pathways for that are so strong, they operate way below the level of conscious thought.
But when you're learning a new language, everything is a manual operation. It's like you're trying to stream a video on a really slow internet connection. You're constantly buffering.
That's a perfect analogy. For the learner, the process is conscious, and it's multi-step. First, your ear hears the sound wanna, step 1. The brain realizes, hey, that's not the want to I was expecting. Step 2, it tries to decode the connected speech, thinking, is this an idiom? A contraction, what is this? Step 3, it identifies the word and its function. Step 4, it checks the grammar. Step 5, it finally synthesizes the meaning within the sentence.
And the second that conscious decoding happens, your brain falls behind the input stream. It's like there's this mental tax you have to pay every 2 or 3 words.
Absolutely. So while the native speaker is cruising along at 150 words per minute, the learner's conscious brain might only be able to process 80 or 90 words per minute because of all that internal decoding it has to do for every single reduction in weak form.
So by the time you've successfully figured out the first sentence,
the speaker is already halfway through the third. And that's when the learner falls into what we call the comprehension gap. Your working memory gets overloaded, and you just feel lost and overwhelmed.
Which means speed isn't just its own separate problem. It's like a magnifying glass that just exposes all the other weaknesses caused by connected speech, reductions, and that lack of automatic recognition.
It is the ultimate test. It forces you to either keep pace and guess or fall behind and give up. And we see this all the time with advanced learners who can read perfectly.
Right.
But they completely freeze up in a fast conversation
Yeah.
because their cognitive processing just hasn't developed the speed it needs for those manual operations.
Okay, so moving beyond the pure mechanics of sound and speed, we hit challenge number 4. The world of idioms and slang. And this is the real paradox of listening, where you can successfully hear and recognize every single word in a sentence and still have absolutely no idea what was just said.
Yet, non-literal language is so tricky because it relies on shared cultural understanding, not on logical word-for-word translation. Idioms are these fixed phrases, these multi-word chunks, where the meaning of the whole group of words is totally different from the individual words inside it.
They're linguistic shortcuts.
They're linguistic shortcuts that only work if you and I share the same secret dictionary of shortcuts.
Let's run through some of the classic examples from the source material, because just defining it doesn't really convey how confusing this is. If someone says, "I'm tired, I'm going to hit the hay," a learner might translate that literally, "I am going to punch dried grass." And that literal translation creates this cognitive conflict. Like, why is this person talking about fighting with farm equipment? We were talking about being tired.
And that cognitive conflict just stops the listening process dead in its tracks. But hit the hay just means go to bed. And to make it even more confusing, we often use it interchangeably with hit the sack. So that slight variation in these fixed phrases also trips up learners who might have memorized one version, but they don't know its common sibling.
And the sources are full of these. Piece of cake is used constantly. If I say that exam was a piece of cake, I mean, it was easy. But think about it. Where is the concept of easy in the word piece or the word cake?
It's not there.
It's not there at all. It's a completely arbitrary cultural assignment.
And we use them for encouragement, too. If I tell an actor to break a leg, I'm wishing them good luck, not, physical harm.
Right.
If you don't know that fixed phrase, you just think the speaker is being incredibly odd or cruel.
Right.
And of course, there's that famously illogical weather idiom that every English learner struggles with. It's raining cats and dogs.
Meaning it's raining heavily.
Right. But if you translate that literally, you're forced to imagine this bizarre, surreal image that just completely derails your listening process.
And then there's slang. The informal, always changing vocabulary that is, for good reason, left out of textbooks because it's just too volatile and too regional.
Slang is the ephemeral layer of language. It changes so quickly, regionally, generationally. Think of words that have kind of been adopted into standard casual English, like cool, which can mean agreeable or good or awesome.
Or chill.
Or chill, meaning to relax. And then you have newer terms like dope or fire to mean something is excellent. Those terms would never, ever appear in a formal English textbook.
And because slang is used so heavily in authentic media, movies, music, social media, the learner is constantly exposed to it without any formal way to learn it or track it.
Exactly. You might have a perfectly good textbook word for wonderful or relax, but you're going to hear fire or chill out all the time. And if you haven't been exposed to that authentic register, you miss the meaning. And worse, because slang is often just one syllable and spoken very fast, it really contributes to that problem of rapid decoding.
Okay, the fifth and final barrier is, I think, arguably the most complex because it requires knowledge that exists completely outside of language rules. You can decode the sounds, you can recognize the idioms, you can understand the grammar, but still miss the entire point of a sentence because you don't have the shared background knowledge. You lack the cultural context.
This is where understanding really requires a subscription to the collective knowledge base of the native speakers. If someone says, well, that's a real catch-22, a learner might logically break that down, catch-22. But what's that mean?
The meaning is tied to Joseph Heller's famous American novel, and the term means a paradoxical, unwinnable situation. It's this circular logic where trying to solve the problem prevents you from meeting the criteria to solve it.
Right.
The phrase is just cultural shorthand for this deep, profound irony and bureaucracy. If you don't know the book or you don't know the cultural shorthand that comes from it, the comment is meaningless. It just flies by as a random number.
And this cultural shorthand is absolutely rampant in everyday conversation, especially in the U.S., through sports metaphors. Yes. Americans, in particular, use baseball and football references as conversational shorthand for everything: business, relationships, success.
The sheer volume of this is staggering. If your boss tells you to touch base with a colleague, it means to reconnect or check in. That's a baseball reference.
Hmm.
A ballpark figure isn't an admission fee. It's a rough estimate.
Hmm.
It comes from the idea of being, within the general area of a baseball stadium. If you hit it out of the park, you did an amazing job.
And football gives us similar metaphors for conflict and strategy. We use a term like Hail Mary for a desperate, long-shot attempt to succeed.
A last-ditch effort.
Or you might argue that someone is trying to move the goalposts when they unfairly change the rules of an argument halfway through. If you don't have that fundamental understanding of the sport, these phrases are completely opaque. And yet they form the very foundation of so much casual business and social conversation.
And we haven't even touched on pop culture. People are constantly quoting movies, TV shows, songs, not just for jokes, but to communicate complex emotional states or shared experiences.
Right.
If you haven't seen that specific movie or show, you miss the joke, you miss the nuance, you miss the whole underlying point. You can't learn this stuff from a textbook. You just have to immerse yourself in the living language.
And that is the ultimate conclusion of this first part. Your struggle is not because you don't know enough grammar. It's a direct result of the complex mechanics and the cultural layers of real living English. Your training prepared you for a formal structured language, but the world is delivering rapid, blended, non-literal information.
So that is the diagnosis. Now we move from understanding the problem to actually implementing the solutions. Okay, here's where we move from theory to, practical application. We've identified the enemy, which is the sheer speed and complexity of native speech. So now we're going to arm you with 4 concrete strategies to help you close that gap between the textbook and the real world and give your brain the tools it needs to start decoding this rapid speech automatically.
This first one is the foundation, but it has to be applied strategically. We need to define authentic very precisely. It has to be real, natural speed conversations that were made for native speakers.
So not the slow, scripted educational content for learners.
Exactly, not that.
Yeah.
Not the slow, super clear stuff. We mean genuine exposure. Podcasts, movies, unscripted interviews, reality TV, talk shows.
Okay, but why is that exposure to natural speed so critical, especially when the speed is the very thing that's causing all the frustration? Why jump right into the deep end?
Because your brain has to build the muscle memory for decoding that natural speed, including all the blending, the reductions, and the slang. If you only ever listen to slow, clear input, your brain will only ever develop the processing capacity for slow, clear input. You have to normalize the chaos. That exposure, even when it's really difficult, is what's necessary to develop that pace expectation in your brain.
But if someone is really struggling, isn't it just incredibly frustrating to jump into a movie where you only understand, say, 30% of the dialogue? How do we balance that frustration with the need for authentic exposure?
That brings us to a really important distinction between active and passive listening. Both of them are valuable tools.
Okay.
Active listening is when you are 100% focused. You're sitting down, headphones on, maybe you're pausing and rewinding, and you're concentrating entirely on comprehension. You're trying to understand the substance. We recommend aiming for a dedicated 20 to 30 minutes of active listening every day. That's your core training session.
And passive listening. I have to admit, I'm a little skeptical about how useful this is. If my brain is focused on cooking or cleaning, how can English in the background possibly help me decode weak forms in connected speech?
That's a great question, and it gets at how language acquisition works below the conscious level. Passive listening is crucial for rhythm, intonation, and cadence.
The music of the language.
The music of the language, exactly. When you're doing another task, you aren't focused on decoding every single word, but your subconscious is absorbing the musicality, the rhythm, where the stress falls in a sentence, the natural speed, the emotional tone. This primes your ear to recognize the flow, so when you do switch to active listening, the sound patterns feel less foreign.
So passive listening builds frequency, and active listening builds intensity.
You need both.
Okay, so when you're picking that authentic content, should you lean more towards, say, the news, which is more formal, or something like reality TV, which is full of slang?
Well, it depends on your goal, but we generally recommend content that is highly structured, but also highly conversational. Sitcoms and structured reality TV are often excellent choices
Why is that?
because they use fast, natural dialogue, but the context is usually visually very clear, which helps your brain guess what it missed. News and formal interviews are better for training formal vocabulary and slower speech. But you really need that fast conversational input to tackle the core problems of connected speech and reductions.
Our second strategy is critical because it directly attacks that visual auditory gap we talked about, especially when the words you see written are so different from the sounds you actually hear. It's all about using subtitles, but not as a permanent crutch.
Right, is a phased learning tool. This is a methodology that's designed to move you from relying on reading to relying purely on your hearing. We propose 3 vital phases based on your current comfort level.
Okay, phase 1.
Phase 1, for beginners, is all about just maintaining engagement. Use subtitles in your native language initially. If the content is way too hard and you're totally lost, you're just going to stop watching.
Right, you'll give up.
Exactly. So native language subtitles help you follow the plot and just keep the English sounds flowing into your ears. It prevents frustration from derailing your study habit.
But the real key to advancing, the transition from beginner to intermediate, has to be phase 2.
Absolutely. Phase 2 is the vital active learning phase. You switch to English subtitles. This is the step that explicitly bridges that gap between the spelling you mastered in class and the actual reduced sound you hear in real life. When you see the words, "What are you going to do?" written on the screen, but your ear hears the sound, "What you going to do?" your brain is forced to make that concrete connection between the visual word and the fast blended pronunciation.
You're creating an anchor. You see the full, correct written form, and you hear the contracted form at the exact same time. It's explicit, direct training in connected speech.
It's the moment of revelation for so many learners. And while you're in phase 2, we strongly recommend a technique called shadowing.
Explain that.
While you're watching with English subtitles, you try to mimic the speaker immediately. Don't just repeat the words later. Try to match their exact speed, their tone, their pronunciation, including all the reduced sounds, right as they say them.
Wow, that's hard.
It is, but it forces you to physically articulate wanna and gonna, which significantly improves your brain's ability to recognize those sounds when they come from someone else. That physical practice is crucial for normalizing the reduced sound.
Okay, and then for advanced learners, you have phase 3.
Yes, for advanced learners, we introduce the watch twice method. The goal here is to wean yourself off that visual dependence completely and train pure reliance on your hearing.
Which means the first time you watch is the test.
Yes, the first watch, absolutely no subtitles. You test yourself. You force your ear and your brain to work together without the visual aid. You're training that processing muscle. And it will be frustrating. You will miss things. Maybe 30% of the conversation.
And the second watch is for targeted correction.
Precisely. The second time you watch, you turn on the English subtitles. And this is where you confirm every single thing you missed. You're not focused on the plot anymore because you already know it. You're focused intensely on the gaps.
Right.
You look for the weak forms that sounded swallowed, the linked words that blended together, the idioms you didn't catch the first time. By explicitly identifying why your brain failed to decode that segment, you train your brain to anticipate it the next time.
Now we get intensely specific. Strategy 3 attacks the connected speech problem head-on by forcing you to explicitly memorize and practice the most common casual contractions. Because these forms are used constantly in casual speech, learning them is essential for immediate, tangible gains in comprehension.
This is your absolute top priority list. If you're hearing a blur of sounds, it's 90% likely that these are the reason. You have to drill them, and so you recognize them instantly, both in their clear written form and their fast spoken form.
Okay, so let's run through the comprehensive list from the sources, because going beyond just the top 3 is crucial for real-world listening. The absolute top tier are gonna for going to, wanna for want to, and got for got to or have to.
Excellent. But we need to expand that list to include other extremely common reductions, especially the ones that involve the word of collapsing into a simple A sound. We need kinda,
Gina.
sorta, and lots of these pop up constantly as modifiers.
And then the ones that involve major sound deletion, like dunno, don't know. When you hear I don't know, you have to stop listening for 3 clear words. The whole phonetic structure has changed.
It has. And related to have to, we often hear hafta.
Hafta, right.
Hafta and supposed to, are massive stumbling blocks because that V sound in have is gone and the S sound in suppose is gone. The learner is listening for sounds that simply vanish.
And then there are the essential blends that involve the pronouns me and you.
Yes. We must memorize gimme,
Yay.
heavy, and whatcha with you. And finally, betcha, betcha, as in, I bet you can't understand this phrase without seeing it written down.
And the practical application here goes way beyond just passive listening. We talked about shadowing, but you have to actively practice saying these forms out loud. Why is production so closely linked to comprehension?
Because the ability to recognize a sound when you hear it is profoundly linked to your ability to produce it yourself. When you practice articulating wanna and gonna at speed, your brain establishes a stronger, faster neural pathway for recognizing those sounds in real time. It normalizes the reduced sound in the production center of your brain, which then speeds up the recognition center when you're listening.
So it's the ultimate linguistic shortcut.
It really is.
You're training your mouth so your ear can succeed. Okay, our final strategy addresses that processing bottleneck we identified earlier. And this is something that learners often dismiss as, cheating or a sign of weakness. But it is actually a very smart tactical strategy, slowing down the audio input.
This is all about using the playback speed options, which are available on almost every major player now, from streaming services to podcast apps, to control the input. We're talking about deliberately slowing it down to 0.75 speed or even 0.5 speed when you first encounter dense, challenging, authentic content.
Okay, so why is this beneficial? If the goal is to understand normal speed, why would you train at a slower speed?
Because it directly addresses the processing bottleneck. By slowing the speech down, you are giving your brain the necessary extra time, those critical milliseconds, to consciously execute those 5 decoding steps we talked about. To process the connected speech, distinguish the weak forms, identify the idiom, interpret the grammar, and synthesize the meaning. You're giving your conscious processing system a chance to catch up without the pressure of being left behind.
It's the difference between trying to read a complicated map while you're running full speed through a city versus being able to stop, study the map, trace the route, and then commit it to memory before you start moving again.
Precisely. It's not cheating, it's training wheels for your linguistic comprehension. It allows you to focus on the tiny phonetic details, the watcha sounds, the schwa vowel that get totally lost at full speed. At 0.75 speed, you can actually hear how want to transitions into wanna because you have the cognitive breathing room to listen to the transition itself.
And the method isn't to stay slow forever, it's to use it as a calculated progression tool.
Exactly. Start slow, 0.75 speed, with content that you find interesting. Get completely comfortable with it at that pace. When you can achieve, say, 90% comprehension at 0.75 speed, you know your brain is starting to automate that decoding process.
And that's your cue to nudge the speed up.
If that's your cue, go to 0.85 speed, master that, then 0.9. You are incrementally building the processing speed you need.
Right.
And the beautiful result is that when you finally listen at 1.0, at normal speed, the reductions in connections no longer sound like a blur. They sound like recognizable, albeit fast, words because your brain has learned what to anticipate during the slow motion training.
So don't feel discouraged if you need to slow down that native content. It is the most strategic step you can take toward accelerating your ultimate mastery.
It is calculated, deliberate practice that is tailored to the specific mechanical challenges of native English.
So we've covered a massive amount of ground today. We started by validating that universal frustration, and we detailed the complexity of real English. The connected speech, the wholesale shortening of words, the sheer speed that creates a processing bottleneck, the non-literal language of slang and idioms, and that required shared cultural context.
And then we armed you with the 4 pillars of strategic listening, engaging with authentic content every day, using that phased subtitle approach, especially the English subtitles, to bridge the sound to spelling gap. Explicitly learning and practicing those persistent contractions, and finally using the speed adjuster as a temporary training wheel to teach your brain how to decode without overwhelming it.
So if you struggle to understand movies or fast native speakers, please know that this is a normal, fundamental part of the learning curve. You are simply in the most difficult phase. That transition from a controlled laboratory environment to real-world linguistic application. Consistency in applying these 4 strategies will absolutely close that gap.
And this raises an important question for you to consider as you move forward. Since connected speech and speed are so profoundly intertwined, where reductions and blending are what make fast speech so confusing, how much faster will your overall comprehension grow if you simultaneously practice recognizing those top-tier contractions while you're gradually increasing the playback speed? Think about how those 2 strategies, the detailed knowledge and the controlled training, work together to multiply your progress. You are not just learning language, you are training your brain for speed and efficiency. Start training your ear today.